So on behalf of the DPA team, a really warm welcome to you all and a really warm welcome to our board of trustees. I'd really like to acknowledge today the presence of Sandy Harrop, who led DPA for a number of decades. Really wonderful to have you here today. I'd also like to welcome Daniel Gerard in his role as the of Board Safety New Zealand. And I'd especially like to welcome Ben and Alicia, who are Teresa's children. Make it today as well. Our Midwinter Forum is traditionally about research, and the intent is sharing up-to-date research as it relates to drowning prevention. And what a thrill today to be sharing the work of one of our colleagues, one of our own, Teresa Stanley, who is DPA's Research and Development Manager. Teresa's been part of the DPA family for 25 years, which is no mean feat. And some 8 years ago, there was a bit of a turning point when Sandy retired and Teresa had the opportunity of stepping up and leading DPA or following an academic pathway, and she chose the latter. So it's really exciting to be able to offer the floor to her this afternoon to share the research that she's done to further drowning prevention knowledge within the sector. There are a few in the room that understand the blood, sweat and tears that go into any doctoral study. And it's wonderful that Teresa's children are here because I think you will know in technicolor the commitment, the unrelenting drive and the extraordinary number of hours it's been invested. So with a lot of enthusiasm and congratulations, I welcome Teresa to talk about her doctoral research, perceived and real water competency and drowning risk among adults in open water of Auckland.
Thank you, Nicola. That's a lovely introduction. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Hello everybody here and all greetings to you all. Ko kaimai, te monga, ko whangamata, moana, ko Stanley, toku iwi, no matamata aho, ko Teresa Stanley, toku ingoa. The kaimai is my mountain, whangamata is my sea. My name is Teresa Stanley, and being born and bred in Matamata, I've now returned there to live. As Nicola mentioned, I've been involved with DPA, or Water Safe Auckland as it was then known, as an inaugural board member when we established the organisation back in the early 90s. And now I've had a number of roles through the time, and I'm now Research and Development Manager. And we're here today to talk about my research completed on adult drowning in open water. And thank you for coming today and providing me with this opportunity. But before I start, I'd just like to take this opportunity to acknowledge a couple of key people who I don't think are here. Both my supervisors, Associate Professors Dr. Alan Ovens and Dr. Dawn Garbett, who have been hugely supportive in guiding me in this journey and offering their wisdom. My sincere and grateful thanks to Dr. Kevin Moran, who started off as my supervisor, and once he retired, he became my advisor, so he couldn't really get off that lightly. I've benefited from his expertise in drowning prevention for much longer than even this journey of research. He provided the research opportunity, the initial encouragement for enrolment, the subject expertise along the way, with his ever-present Welsh humour. And I'm really fortunate to have had such a great team, so thank you. Growing up in Matamata, we were lucky enough to have a beach house on the beach at Mount Maunganui. So spending half my life swimming up and down a pool in Matamata, I spent the other half at the beach enjoying the sun and sand. And when I was old enough, at 14 years, I qualified as a surf lifeguard and began began volunteer lifeguarding. My first summer on patrol, I rescued a much larger gentleman than me, much older, and I was at a loss as to why he needed to be rescued. What I thought was a pretty fun, pretty benign condition. As with most rescues, the gentleman was fine, although very embarrassed about having to be rescued under his circumstances. And this research looked at scenarios like that one I experienced. It is about drowning among adults in open water. What is drowning? It's significant, it's complex, it's multifaceted. And they are themes that are repeated throughout my research and you'll hear in the presentation today. A simple, linear solution won't fix the multifaceted and complex nature of open water drowning. And I used the wicked problem framework to discuss the solutions for open water drowning among adults. And here are some of the commonly accepted aspects of wicked problems. They're difficult to define. They have unforeseen outcomes. There's no clear solution. They require changing behaviour. Does it sound like anything you know? The drowning problem is a wicked problem. So why are adults drowning? My research revolves around untangling this problem. Is it because we overestimate how good we think we are? Or is it because we underestimate the risk? From those queries, I developed 4 research questions that underpinned 4 separate case studies. I was looking at the factors that led to gaps between people's perception of how safe they thought they were in open water and how safe they actually were. Or what causes the mismatch between perceived and actual water competence or risk estimation in open water. If the gaps were any different for other groups or high-risk drowning groups. And does increased competence change that perception of risk relative to the actual risk? And then, based on Newell's dynamic constraints model, and Langendorfer's adaptation of that model, and that's looking at the interaction between the individual and the task and the environment, I've developed this framework to help you test those research questions. Langendorfer argues that the relationship between these 3 factors, the individual, the environment, and the activity, and down here again. So out of the relationship between those factors emerge a level of competence or drowning behaviour. And this model allows for that level of water competence to be investigated, but also focuses on any gap between reality and perception. And I argue that the further apart reality is to perception, the greater the drowning risk. Conversely, the closer reality is to perception, the lower the risk of drowning. Now, it was important to define water competence as much more than what has been the norm. And I based water competence on the 15 competencies defined by Stallman, Moran, Langendorfer, and Co. And these include the competencies in the psychomotor domain, such as your entries, your floating, your swimming, your being able to submerge, your being able to get out of the water to a safe place. And in the cognitive domain, your knowledge of risks and coping with the risk. And also the affective domain around attitudes and behaviours. Traditional aquatics and swimming lessons have focused on those practical competencies of 1 to 7, or actually more commonly around number 5, swimming. And this thesis explores competencies 8 to 15. And note that we would use that term competence, which is really important in the dynamic nature of the open water environment. A skill refers to having the ability to perform a practical task, but think about it this way. Can I jump into the water? Yep, I have the ability to jump off rocks into the sea. But do I have the competence to safely negotiate the slippery rocks, the cold water, the incoming swells, seaweed, and anything else that the open water environment may offer? Maybe, maybe not. That's why we use the term competence, and it's relative to the environment, the activity, and the individual attribute. Another thing that was important was to focus on adult drowning. So these graphs are percentages of drowning. This is by age. These ones here are adults. The dark is fatal and the light is non-fatal drowning. And you can see that despite much of the funding and energy going into preventing drowning among children, adults comprise 3/4 of fatal drowning and well over half non-fatal drowning. So preventing adults from drowning needs significant investment in energy and funding as well. The other important point here with the open water, almost 90% of drowning occurs in the open water environment. So open water is talking about all natural water spaces such as beaches, waterholes, harbours, lakes and rivers. So having established the need to dig deeper into the reasons why adults were drowning in open water, I devised a series of studies to look at this. In the first study, we looked at parents. We asked parents and their children and their perceptions of water competence for them and their children. Study 2 investigated a high risk of drowning group by ethnicity, that's Māori, Pacifica. Okay. Study 3, another high risk group, older adults. And study 4 measured perceived and actual water competence in a pool and open water. The first 3 studies have been published or in press. Study 4 has yet to be published. So the first study, here are the research objectives. We asked 309 parents of primary age children throughout 6 schools for their opinions in schools. Parents completed a self-complete survey that was returned to their child's teacher. Well, over half of parents thought they could swim well or very well. Over half of parents could swim less than 25 metres. Over half hadn't done that in the open water, but almost 2/3 of adults, of parents, felt quite safe in open water. Okay, let's look at the next one. Over half of parents thought their children could swim well or very well. Most of those children could swim less than 25 metres, most not in open water, but just over half of parents thought their children were safe in open water. Let's think about it. Think how safe you would be if you lost your boogie board outside of the surf zone, or you fell out of a kayak in the middle of the lake. if you could swim less than 25 metres, let alone if you were a child. So we concluded the perception of risk, and that of being in open water, doesn't necessarily relate to the perceived competence level. Perception of safety was definitely influenced by gender. Perception of how good is good enough is relatively low in terms of keeping safe in open water. Then we explored the risk of drowning by ethnicity. And this graph might look a little bit awkward, so I'll try and explain it to you. The yellow and orange bars show percentages of population for Auckland and New Zealand. So these are the percentages of Asian in Auckland, orange for New Zealand, and the same. Okay, percentages of New Zealand European in Auckland and percentages in New Zealand, and so forth. And what it does highlight is it shows the anomalies of where people are drowning or being overrepresented in drowning. And definitely in our diverse demographics in Tamaki Makaurau, it means we have some anomalies when compared to New Zealand. In Auckland, Pacific and Asian ethnicities make up higher percentages in Auckland than in New Zealand. But look here at this overrepresentation of Pacific, and then in New Zealand, we've got an overrepresentation of fatal and non-fatal drowning for Māori. So when compared to actual ethnic population, we can see Māori are overrepresented in New Zealand and Pacifica in Auckland. So in study 2, we looked at these research objectives. And we went to 12 workplaces, 221 employees completed a self-complete survey in their work environment as part of a health and safety presentation. So what did we find from there? Almost 3/4 of Māori and Pacifica adults think they can swim well, but 3/4 can swim less, but can't swim 25 metres. So 3/4 estimate they can swim less than 25 metres. Is that really a good enough level of competence to keep you safe? If you fell out of a boat in Manukau Bar or off the rocks on the west coast. We did find males were more confident. There was a definite overestimation of competence, underestimation of risk, and the perception of being a good swimmer probably doesn't match that reality. So it gave us further evidence to highlight this gap between reality and perception. And the gap was even greater for Māori and Pacifica. The study 2 had looked at adults for all ages, 20 to 65 years. However, there is an emerging trend of adults over 65 years in the drowning. You can see them up the end here, over 65 years, especially so in the Auckland region. So, study 3. We asked 389 adults about their participation in aquatic environments, what they thought about their risk, their attitudes, and how good they thought they were. It was completed at DIY stores in Auckland and Waikato and at the boat show. So we found adults were safer in open water due to their lower perceived swimming and floating competence. They also were less risk, they reported higher awareness and aversion to risk, and they had slightly safer water attitude. Their less exposure to an aquatic activity also meant that they were safer in open water. Conversely, they were at higher risk because of that less exposure in aquatic activity. It meant their frequency, they participated less frequently and less recent. Okay, so this meant that it may have caused a less realistic assessment of their competency. There were also a number of known and unknown medical conditions in that older age group that put them at higher risk as well. So drilling down into the competencies, these 15 competencies, the previous 3 studies highlighted a concern around that accurate assessment of personal competence, at number 13. Most adults thought they were competent, with a high level of water competence, but that didn't necessarily relate to a level that would keep them safe in open water. So while there did seem to be gaps around water competence between reality and perception, and that they seemed to be larger, higher risk groups, we didn't really know this for sure because we hadn't yet tested actual competence. So in study 4, we worked with 63 adult participants who had completed a workplace or a community water safety education program as part of DPA programs. It was a paired, repeated measured test design, so we asked people at the beginning how good they thought they were. We asked them at the end how good they thought they were, and in the interim, they completed an education program. We tested some actual competencies in a pool, and then we tested those same competencies in open water. And there were some quite concerning results. From pre to post, there was an increased risk awareness at the post-testing, so this was positive, and it's what you would expect after an educational program. We also found that the level achieved in the pool didn't match what they did in the open water. So, for example, almost a quarter of participants at the beginning thought they could swim 200 metres in 5 minutes. 6% could actually do that in the pool. 1 participant could do that in the open water. But at the end of the testing, even more, just over a quarter, thought they could swim 200 metres in 5 minutes. Yep. In the floating, participants also thought they were better floaters at the end, despite a quarter not being able to float for 15 seconds in a pool. So in the pre-testing, those participants thought their competence was pretty high. In the post-testing, it was even higher. Oh, it's a laughable matter. Concerningly, there was also an increase in unsafe attitudes reported, such as others being more at risk or relying on your swimming fitness to stay safe. So, the levels that people thought were good competence were probably not good enough to stay safe in open water. You are going to need to float for more than 15 seconds or to swim more than 25 metres in most of our open water environments to stay safe. A rescue is unlikely to be undertaken within 15 seconds. We also found gaps between what people could do in a pool and what they could do in open water. And this may be one of the key reasons of that overestimation of confidence. People could swim, or they could get out of the water to a safe place, but they couldn't do it nearly so well in that dynamic open water environment. Finally, we found a definitive gap between what people thought they could do and what they could actually do. So some people reported reasonable, realistic idea of what they could do in the pool, but not in open water, even after that open water activity. So drowning is a complex phenomenon. It's multifaceted and it is significant. And this is the first study that has asked adults about their water competence and their risk perception, and then put them in a pool and tested them. And then put them in the open water and tested them, and then asked them again. And we've empirically provided evidence that there is a gap between the reality and the perception of adult water competence in open water. And that the greater the gap, the greater the risk of drowning. Page. So it's not so much, the issue isn't so much that people can't swim or float, but they just can't do it as well as they think they can, especially in open water. So what does this mean about the wicked problem of drowning? Remember, these are some of the factors that make up a wicked problem. So I've picked out a few of the recommendations as they relate to the wicked problem framework. Some of those clear definitions. And we probably still don't have a clear definition. Does swim mean survive? Does swim and survive equal water competence? Looking at the interdependencies and the dynamic nature of that open water environment, we really need to link up our teaching, link up our classroom teaching, so that we're teaching all of those competencies. But there are often unforeseen outcomes. What happens when we learn to swim in a pool with our goggles on, in the shallow water? What do we think of our competence? What do our parents think of our competence? We know parents are more confident that their child is safe in open water because of swimming lessons, but it might not mean anything when they get to the open water. Wicked problems are socially complex. Drowning is associated with gender, age, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. How do you tell someone not to fish when they need to put food on the table for their family? We need to ensure that people have the competence to fish safely, to be safe in open water, and to know what to do if something does go wrong. There are no clear solutions to wicked problems. We can't change all of you males to females. But seriously, hopefully we will get to that 65-year age group. But we need to introduce them education so we do get wiser with age. We need to work out somehow how we're going to change those attitudes. We will always have new parents who need to be provided with information on how to keep their children safe, and new residents to New Zealand who need to be able to keep themselves safe. So there's always going to be an ongoing need for drowning prevention education. There's no one single organisation responsible. we need to continually and generally collaborate and work together. No power games or point scoring. And the new Waiora Aotearoa, Navigating to a Safety Future, that's the New Zealand strategy. That water safety sector's collective approach to ensure everyone connects to and enjoys the water safely is a start. But we just need to make sure this is played out in practice. Other things about wicked problems, they're characterised by chronic policy failure. And it wasn't so long ago that we were being taught to teach 200 metres to swim. If you could swim 200 metres, you'd be safe in the water. Remember, drowning prevention isn't a here and now tick in the box. Like all education, it's a process, and it's related to that outdoor, dynamic outdoor environment. How about our current life jacket legislation? How can we comply to legislation when there's 16 different bylaws around the country? We really need to work together and sort this out. Now, not all of these issues and solutions were investigated throughout the research, although they are definitely linked and interdependent. But the key one here at the bottom involves changing behaviour. And much of the drowning in New Zealand is because people underestimate the risk and overestimate the competence. And we need to introduce educational components on perception of competency and risk in all drowning prevention, education for all ages and stages. So what now? Well, as Nicola alluded, this research has taken quite some time. But the good thing about that has meant that we have been able to learn along the way, and we've been able to implement initiatives along the way. So one of these things is we've added, or we are about to, add an adult component to our e-learning modules. We already have modules for youth and young children, for teachers of primary school age and parents of young children. We have specific rock fishing, moana gathering, and this is another module that we'll add to this. And the focus of this is around assessing personal competence. We've started education on personal competency in all our education, and that includes perceived versus real competency. It includes talking about the difference between the pool and open water. And it also includes talking about the perceived safe levels of water competence in open water and what might be realistically more appropriate. And we're also looking at developing and evaluating some educational initiatives around this that could be implemented worldwide, or at least nationwide. Now, before I finish up, I'd just like to take this opportunity again to thank you for coming along. It's a real privilege to be able to talk about what I've been doing for the last period of time. And although the presentation sounds like a solo effort, it's definitely not the case. The research has been a culmination of lifelong experiences, and there's lots of people here today that have been part of the journey that I'd like to acknowledge. My family, Ben and Alicia, my children, thanks for taking the time off to support the old duck, as the teacher would say. Jan Taylor, ex-DPA employee and now a life member, thank you for your input. Sandy Harrop, who was CE, wonderful friend, and she was at CE when I encouraged my enrolment in this PhD, and the whole of the DPA whānau. I wouldn't be here presenting this awesome research today without this team. So thank you for your support, your assistance with all the data gathering, your enthusiasm and your encouragement. Thank you all. I know you're scattered all around the room. Don't stop. No, I haven't finished there, Madison. Thank you to Nicola for writing it in my KPIs that I was going to complete my PhD by the end of this financial year. But really for your empathetic encouragement and for helping me do so. Thank you. Thank you to the DPA board for your continuous and unwavering support. Thank you to Hannah, my DP, for helping me to make my findings a little bit more translatable and relatable. And last but not least, thank you, Kevin. What a great role model you have been for linking academia into the real world of drowning prevention. Thank you for ensuring DPA has the pillar of evidence-based research entwined in its DNA. Thank you for starting me on my journey, being my co-author in the publication, and seeing me through to the end. Thank you for being a generous mentor, a loyal friend, and the best tomato grower I know.